The fragility behind uncontrolled emotion. You don't lose control in big moments, lose it in small, unnoticed reactions. It rarely begins with something dramatic. It starts in subtle shifts that most people ignore. A change in tone, a look that feels off, a comment that carries a slight edge. In these moments, something inside you moves, almost instantly. The shift feels minor, almost insignificant, but it sets a pattern into motion. Before you are aware of it, your internal state has already adjusted. What most people fail to notice is how quickly they attach meaning to what they experience. The mind does not wait, it interprets immediately. It assigns intention, creates assumptions, and builds a narrative around the situation. And once that narrative is formed, emotion follows. The process feels natural, automatic, even justified, but it is not neutral, it is constructed. And because it happens so quickly, it feels like a direct response to reality rather than a reaction to interpretation. This is where fragility begins, not in the intensity of the emotion, but in the speed at which it takes hold. The faster your emotional state shifts, the less control you have over it. You become responsive to external inputs without awareness. Your internal environment starts to mirror what is happening around you, rather than remaining independent of it. And in that state, stability becomes difficult to maintain. The tension lies in the fact that these reactions feel authentic. You believe you are simply being honest with how you feel. But what is often overlooked is that authenticity without awareness becomes reactivity. When every emotional movement is trusted and expressed without examination, your state becomes unpredictable, not to others, but to yourself. You are no longer choosing how to respond to or following what arises. The deeper realization comes when you begin to see that not every emotional response reflects truth. Many of them are shaped by past experiences, expectations, and internal patterns that operate beneath the surface. The mind fills in gaps with familiar interpretations, and those interpretations trigger emotional reactions that feel immediate and real. But they are not always accurate. They are habitual. As you start to notice this, even slightly, something changes. You begin to observe the moment when meaning is attached. You see the interpretation forming before the emotion fully takes over. This awareness creates a subtle pause, not a forced delay, but a natural gap where you are no longer completely inside the reaction. You can see it, feel it, and still remain separate from it. This separation weakens the intensity of the emotional shift. The reaction does not disappear, but it loses its authority. It no longer dictates your behavior in the same way. You are no longer immediately carried by it. Instead, you are aware of it as something that is happening within you, not something that defines your response. Over time, this changes how you experience situations entirely. What once felt triggering begins to feel neutral. What once caused immediate shifts in your state begins to pass without impact. The external world remains the same, but your internal response becomes more stable. You are no longer adjusting yourself to every stimulus. You are maintaining a consistent state regardless of it. And in that consistency, the fragility begins to disappear, replaced by a steady awareness that is no longer easily moved by every passing moment. The silent advantage of composure. The calmest person in the room always holds the strongest position. Yet this is rarely understood because it does not appear as power in an obvious way. It does not raise its voice, it does not rush to respond, and it does not compete for attention. Instead, it remains still, controlled, and deliberate. Because of this, most people overlook it, assuming that visible expression equals strength. But what they fail to notice is how much influence is lost the moment composure is broken. What is often missed is the silent adjustment that happens in every interaction. People are constantly observing emotional stability, even if they are not consciously aware of it. A reaction, a shift in tone, a sudden change in expression. These become signals. They reveal where pressure exists, where tension builds, and where influence can take hold. When someone reacts quickly or emotionally, it creates a pattern that others can sense, not necessarily in a calculated way, but in a natural, instinctive one. This is the unseen social pattern. Emotional movement invites further movement. If you react, others respond to that reaction. If you show instability, others adjust their behavior around it. Conversations begin to follow the path of your emotional state rather than your intention. What started as a neutral interaction becomes shaped by how you feel, not by what is actually happening. And in that shift, control becomes less defined. The power of composure lies in removing that pattern entirely. When there is no visible reaction, there is no signal to respond to. The interaction remains grounded, steady, and contained. Without emotional fluctuations, there is nothing for others to build upon. The dynamic does not escalate, does not shift unpredictably, and does not move away from its original state. It stays neutral, and in that neutrality, control is maintained. The psychological leverage point here is subtle. It is not about suppressing emotion or appearing distant. It is about not allowing every internal movement to become external expression. When you maintain composure, you create a layer of separation between what you feel and what you show. This separation prevents others from accessing your internal state through your reactions. Without access, influence becomes limited. As this awareness develops, your focus begins to shift. You stop prioritizing immediate expression and start valuing stability. Instead of reacting to every change in the environment, you begin to observe it. You allow situations to unfold without immediately inserting yourself into them emotionally. This creates space, and within that space, your responses become more intentional. Over time, this changes how others experience you. There is a sense of steadiness that cannot be easily disrupted. Without visible reactions, without clear emotional shifts, the usual patterns of interaction begin to dissolve. People cannot easily predict how you will respond, and without that predictability, their ability to influence the situation decreases. Not because you are resisting, but because you are not participating in the same reactive dynamic, and from this, a different kind of presence begins to form. You are no longer defined by how quickly or strongly you react. You are defined by how consistently you remain the same. There is a quiet control in that consistency, a calm authority that does not need to prove itself through action or expression. Because when your internal state remains steady, the external world loses its ability to move you without your permission. The internal discipline that few develop, reacting weakens you. Yet you still feel the urge to respond. It appears without warning, often in moments that seem small but carry a subtle emotional charge. A word lands slightly wrong, a gesture feels dismissive, a silence stretches longer than expected. Something inside you shifts, and before you consciously recognize it, the impulse is already forming. It does not ask for permission, it simply arises, demanding expression. This is the internal conflict most people live with but rarely examine. On one side, there is awareness, the understanding that reacting will not serve you, that it will only pull you into a situation unnecessarily. On the other side, there is the impulse, fast, convincing, and emotionally charged. The tension between these two forces creates a moment of friction, but for most people, that moment passes too quickly to be noticed. The impulse wins, and the reaction follows. What remains hidden is that the real battle is not external. It is not about what was said or done. It is about what happens inside you in that brief moment before action. The mind begins to interpret, to assign meaning, to build a narrative around the situation. That narrative generates emotion, and that emotion pushes you toward a response. Because this process is automatic, it feels like a direct reaction to reality. But in truth, it is a reaction to your own internal construction of that reality. The discipline begins when you start to see this process as it unfolds. Not after the reaction, but during it. You begin to notice the impulse as it rises. The subtle pressure to speak, to respond, to correct. This awareness does not remove the impulse, but it changes your relationship to it. You are no longer fully inside it. You are observing it. This shift creates space, a small but significant distance between what you feel and what you do. Within that space, the impulse begins to lose its authority. It is no longer something that must be acted upon immediately. It becomes something that can be held, examined, and allowed to pass without expression. The urgency fades, not because the situation has changed, but because you are no longer identifying with the impulse completely. The principle here is simple, but it requires consistency. Not every emotion requires action. Not every thought needs to be expressed. Internal movements are temporary. They rise, they peak, and they fade. When you begin to see them in this way, the pressure to act on them weakens. You stop treating every internal signal as something that demands a response. This is where mental boundaries begin to form. A boundary between your internal experience and your external behavior. Without this boundary, everything you feel becomes visible through your reactions. With it, there is control. You can feel without revealing, observe without engaging, and experience without being directed by it. Over time, this changes the structure of your behavior. The impulse still appears, but it no longer dominates. It becomes one element among many, rather than the driving force behind your actions. You gain the ability to pause, to observe, and to choose. The reaction is no longer immediate. It becomes optional. And from this process, a deeper transformation takes place. You are no longer someone who is driven by every internal shift. You become someone who can remain steady even when those shifts occur. There is a quiet discipline in this state, a controlled awareness that allows you to experience emotion without being controlled by it. The state where nothing can shake you. Imagine a version of yourself placed in situations that once disturbed you, and nothing shifts internally. The same pressure exists, the same unpredictability, the same behavior from others, but your internal state remains unchanged. There is no sudden tension, no need to react, no subtle disturbance beneath the surface. What once felt personal now feels distant, almost neutral. Not because you have withdrawn from the world, but because you are no longer internally tied to it in the same way. What most people never fully realize is what happens when attachment fades. They believe emotional stability comes from controlling situations, from ensuring things go the right way, from managing how others behave. But this approach creates constant tension, because the external world is never fully stable. When your peace depends on external conditions, it becomes fragile. It shifts with every change, every unexpected outcome, every unpredictable interaction. The shift begins when you stop placing your internal state in the hands of what happens around you. You start to see that stability is not created by controlling the environment, but by removing your dependency on it. Situations can change, people can behave unpredictably, outcomes can move in directions you did not expect, and yet your internal state remains steady. Not because you are resisting these changes, but because you are no longer attached to how they should unfold. This is the quiet emergence of inner authority. You are no longer seeking stability outside yourself. You are creating it within. Your focus shifts from managing situations to maintaining your own internal environment, and as that environment becomes consistent, the need to control anything outside of you begins to dissolve naturally. Over time, this creates a form of presence that is difficult to disrupt. You move through different environments, different levels of pressure, different interactions, and yet your internal state does not fluctuate in response. You are aware of what is happening, but you are not absorbed by it. You engage when necessary, but you do not carry the emotional weight of every situation with you. Others begin to sense this without fully understanding it. Without visible reactions, without emotional fluctuations, the usual patterns of interaction begin to fail. There is nothing to provoke, nothing to destabilize, nothing to influence. Not because you are resisting, but because there is no internal movement that can be engaged. The interaction loses its usual structure, and from this, your identity settles into something more stable. You are no longer defined by what happens around you, or by how others behave toward you. You are defined by your ability to remain unchanged within yourself. There is no need to prove, no need to react, no need to control. Your state becomes self-contained, and in that quiet, controlled state, one realization becomes clear without effort: your stability no longer depends on anything outside of you. Nothing outside of you can shake you,